North Carolina keeps two different economies running side by side, and most of the country only ever sees one of them. Drive the coast from Wilmington up through the Outer Banks, or walk the finance towers going up in Charlotte and the tech campuses spreading across the Triangle, and the state looks like one of the fastest growing places in America. But drive an hour or two inland, off the interstates and onto the two-lane roads that cut through the old Tobacco and Cotton counties, and you find a different country. These are 10 North Carolina towns living in conditions most people believe ended somewhere overseas, counted down by how far the basics have fallen. And the town at number 1 lost its only hospital, and a woman died in the back of an ambulance waiting for a helicopter that never came in time. Number 10 is Roanoke Rapids. It sits in Halifax County on the fall line of the Roanoke River, and for most of the 20th century it was a mill town, built around cotton mills that spun cloth and gave the whole city its reason to exist. One of those mills, the old J.P. Stevens plant, is where a union organizer named Crystal Lee Sutton worked, the real woman whose story became the movie Norma Ray. All the textile mills in Roanoke Rapids have since closed, and nearly 3,000 people lost their jobs when they did. Today, close to 1 in 4 residents lives below the poverty line, nearly double the rate for the state as a whole. A paper mill moved in to replace some of what left, but a paper mill does not employ a town the size a half-dozen cotton mills once did. Number 9 is Duplin County. It is home to close to 2 million hogs, more than any other county in the United States, and the industrial farms that raise them store the waste in open air, pits the industry calls lagoons, then spray it onto nearby fields. Residents like Elsie Herring, whose family has owned their land for more than 100 years, say the smell gets into the house and will not leave. Devon Hall, who runs a local advocacy group, says neighbors have had to move birthdays and family cookouts indoors because the stench outside is too much to sit through. Scientists have found genetic traces of hog waste inside the homes nearest the farms, drifting in on the spray and settling on kitchen tables. The Environmental Protection Agency has investigated whether the state discriminated against the mostly Black, Latino, and Native American families who live closest to the lagoons when it approved the permits. In 2018, a jury sided with Duplin County neighbors who sued the world's largest hog producer over the smell, the flies, and the trucks hauling dead animals past their homes at all hours. Living next to the lagoons, people who testified said, made them feel like prisoners in their own houses. Number 8 is Warrenton, seat of Warren County, and the nearby community of Afton, where in 1982, the state of North Carolina buried more than 7,000 truckloads of soil laced with toxic PCBs. The chemical had been illegally dumped along 240 miles of rural roads, and when the state needed somewhere to put the contaminated dirt, it chose Afton, a mostly Black community sitting on a water table only a few feet below the surface, where most families drew their drinking water from wells. Warren County was at the time one of the poorest counties in the state. Residents fought the landfill for years, and in 1982 more than 500 people were arrested trying to block the trucks with their own bodies, a protest historians now credit as the birth of the environmental justice movement in America. The landfill did not stop that day. It took the state and the federal government 20 years and $17 million to finally detoxify the site, and the land still cannot be used for much of anything. Warren County remains one of the poorest, most rural counties in the state. Number 7 is Rayford, the seat of Hoke County. In 1994, an 8th grader named Rob Leandro and 4 other low-wealth school districts, Hoke, Halifax, Robeson, Vance, and Cumberland, sued the state of North Carolina, arguing their children were being denied the education children in wealthier counties received. Kathleen Leandro, whose family settled in Rayford after her husband retired from Fort Bragg, said that by the 90s almost nothing was left of the town's tax base but a single textile plant. In 1997, the state's Supreme Court agreed the students had a right to what it called a sound basic education and described what these counties were actually working with: inadequate buildings, leaking roofs, erratic heating, cracked plaster, and rusting exposed pipes. That was nearly 30 years ago. The case, known ever since as Leandro, dragged through courtrooms for 3 decades while the buildings kept aging. In the spring of 2026, the state Supreme Court finally closed the case for good, dismissing it entirely and ruling that the years of legal wrangling meant it could never be refiled. The children the lawsuit was named for are grown now with children of their own, and the roofs in the counties that sued are still somebody else's problem to fix. Number 6 is East Laurenburg in Scotland County, and this one is different from anything else on this list because the town itself no longer legally exists. It was built around the Waverley Mill in the early 1900s and once had close to 900 residents. By the time the mill closed and the jobs left, the population had fallen to under 300, and more than a third of the people still living there were below the poverty line. The town government fell apart along with the tax base. For 5 straight years, East Laurenburg failed to turn in a financial audit the state required, and an investigation later found town money had gone missing under circumstances the state treasurer said pointed to embezzlement. In December of 2021, the state's local government commission did something it had never done before. It voted to revoke East Laurenburg's charter outright. On the 30th of June 2022, the town of East Laurenburg ceased to be a town at all. Its assets handed to the county, its street signs the only proof left that it had ever been incorporated in the first place. Number 5 is Lumberton, the seat of Robeson County, which by nearly every measure is the poorest county in North Carolina. More than 1 in 4 residents lives below the poverty line, and the median household income sits near $30,000 a year, barely half the state average. Robeson County is home to the Lumbee, the largest tribe east of the Mississippi that still lacks full federal recognition, and it was flooded twice in 3 years. First by Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and again by Hurricane Florence in 2018, each time sending the Lumber River over its banks and into homes that had barely finished drying out. A state analysis found more than half of Robeson's Latino residents and more than a third of its American Indian and Black residents live in poverty, compared to about 1 in 5 of its white residents. The tobacco and textile jobs that once anchored the county thinned out decades ago and never really came back. Officials call it persistent poverty, a Census Bureau term for counties that have stayed poor for more than 30 years running. Number 4 is Windsor, seat of Bertie County, which by one recent ranking of the state's poorest counties comes in second only to Robeson. The town sits along the Cache River, and on the 9th of October, 2016, Hurricane Matthew pushed that river to 17 feet, more than double its flood stage, swallowing roughly 60 homes in a town of only around 3,600 people. Large sections of Windsor sit inside both the 100-year and 500-year floodplains, which means the town is essentially built on borrowed time between storms. The state eventually approved millions of dollars to buy out and elevate the worst-hit homes, but that money moves slowly, and the empty houses closest to the river are still waiting. Bertie County's poverty rate runs above 1 in 4, the kind of number that turns an ordinary hurricane season into a permanent emergency. Number 3 is Fair Bluff, a small town on the Lumber River in Columbus County that Hurricane Matthew put 4 feet of water into in 2016, flooding every business on Main Street. A handful reopened by 2018. Then Hurricane Florence hit the same ground 2 years later, and none of them came back a second time. The town's population fell from around 950 people before Matthew to roughly 600 after both storms. Locals describe downtown as a movie set for a ghost town, storefronts with the windows still smashed out, a high watermark still visible inside an old computer repair shop, a Methodist church playing recorded hymns to an empty sidewalk. There is no grocery store left in Fair Bluff. The nearest one is a 12-mile drive. Fair Bluff is the 3rd town on this list that Hurricane Matthew put underwater in the same 10 days of October 2016, after Windsor and Princeville a few counties over. Number 2 is Princeville in Edgecombe County, the oldest town in America chartered by Black Americans. Founded by formerly enslaved people in 1865, who first called it Freedom Hill. Princeville sits below the banks of the Tar River, and it has flooded more than a dozen times in the last century. The 2 worst floods, in 1999 and 2016, each put most of the town underwater, the second one leaving an estimated 80% of Princeville submerged. Longtime residents describe the town as sacred ground, the place their ancestors built with their own hands after slavery ended, and many refuse to leave no matter how many times the river comes back for them. The population has fallen from more than 2,000 households before the worst flood to under 1,600 today, as residents who took federal buyouts moved away for good. For years, the plan was to protect Princeville for good with an expanded levee, funded in part by Congress. That plan is now dead, and the town's future instead rests on 88 acres of higher ground it was granted outside the floodplain, land some displaced residents say still might not be enough to draw them home. Princeville's median income sits around $33,000 a year, in a town that has survived nearly every disaster except the slow one of being forgotten. Number 1 is Belhaven, a 1-stoplight fishing and farming town on the Pungo River in Beaufort County. On the 1st of July 2014, Vidant Health closed the town's only hospital, leaving around 23,000 people across 2 counties without an emergency room. The nearest one was suddenly nearly 50 miles away. 6 days later, a 48-year-old woman named Portia Gibbs suffered a heart attack and died in the back of an ambulance sitting in a high school parking lot, waiting for a helicopter to fly her to the nearest emergency room, which no longer existed in her own town. Belhaven's mayor, Adam O'Neill, walked 273 miles to Washington, D.C. That same summer, roughly a mile of protest for every mile between his town and the hospital that used to save its residents. He made the same walk again the following year, this time carrying an empty wooden coffin labeled "Save Our Hospitals." 1 mile for each of the 283 rural hospitals nationwide that were then at risk of closing. O'Neill called the hospital the heartbeat of his community. More than a decade later, Belhaven still does not have its hospital back, and residents needing emergency care still make the same long drive that cost Portia Gibbs her life. That is the other North Carolina, the one that does not make it onto the state's tourism website. It sits an hour or 2 off the interstate in counties that grew cotton and tobacco and hogs for the rest of the country and never got much of the money back. If you grew up in one of these towns, or watched one hollow out over the years, tell me in the comments which one on this list surprised you the most, and if you are curious how it compares just across the border, the video on South Carolina towns living the same way is on the screen now.